Hello and welcome to ZalthoLIVE, the podcast featuring Zen Buddhist monk Claude AnShin Thomas, who will share with you his life experiences that includes not only military combat, personal violence, and addiction, but also healing, transformation, and the ongoing joy of everyday life. Please enjoy listening.
As I've been introduced, my name is Claude AnShin Thomas. I'm a disabled combat Vietnam veteran. I served with the 116th Assault Helicopter Company as a door gunner, and then OJT to become a crew chief. I can use those terms here. I think the majority of us are veterans, and if not, if you don't understand, just wave your hand, and I will be glad to explain those acronyms or those abbreviations. I generally don't like to be present when I'm introduced because I've seen in the past where it puts too much pressure on the person doing the introducing to say all kinds of fanciful things, and also I'm rather I've heard some of these introductions before, and I'm always going like, really? I am just an ordinary person, sort of. Now, I am a fully ordained Zen Buddhist monk in a Japanese Buddhist tradition. However, I'm not here to sell you anything. I'm not here to convince you of the rightness or wrongness of any approach to this topic. I'm only here to share with you what my experience was and how and how this spiritual practice, not religious, but spiritual practice, has served me into learning how to live at peace with my unpeacefulness. And there are a lot of people who want to sell cures. They want to give you the 10 easy steps to eliminating the realities of post-traumatic stress. What I will say is that what I have learned over time is that the truth of my experience and the way that manifests itself in my life today, it never goes away. The truth of that experience never goes away. I do not need to be fixed because I am not broken. Healing is not done to me, it's done by me. And so I've had the privilege to work, to engage with combat veterans and their family members all over the world. And I often go into war zones where people are actively fighting. I visit refugee camps where people have been, who are escaping war, violence, and suffering. I go into locked psychiatric institutes. I go into prisons. And what I make an effort to do is to present as authentically as I can that we don't need to be fixed or cured because we're not broken. I was shot down 5 times. I spent a significant amount of time in the hospital. Now, 5 times sounds like a lot. Well, it's more than some and not as much as others. I served only 1 tour. And I remember laying in military hospital, recovering from the injuries from the last time I was shot down, and the re-enlistment NCO came in to visit us. I was on the orthopedic ward at Ireland Army Hospital in Fort Knox, Kentucky. The re-enlistment NCO came in and did his spiel, and he offered me, if I were to re-enlist for 6 years, he offered me $10,000 and 2 pay grades. Now, this was in 1968, and I was 19 years old. 19 going on 20. 10 grand was a lot of money back then. And 2 pay grades would have made me an E7, well, a specialist the specialist 7th class, but would have made me a spec 7. I asked him, would I have to return to Vietnam? And he asked me what my MOS was. I gave it to him. He reflected for a moment, looked at some papers, and he said, yes, absolutely. And then I told him unceremoniously to go do things to himself and to get out of my room. I will share with you unequivocally that there are often times that I feel cowardly because of that decision, even though it was probably a good decision. But this is the way that I'm impacted by my military service. I have what's deemed a highly disturbed sleep pattern. And that highly disturbed sleep pattern manifests itself in the reality that I haven't slept more than 2 hours consecutively in any night since. The date changes sometimes. Sometimes I say 66, sometimes I say 67, because I cannot remember the actual date of the event, what year it occurred in. And I suffered greatly from that for a long time because I had this preconceived idea that I was supposed to sleep a fixed amount of time and my sleep was supposed to look a certain way, and that if that didn't happen, there was something terribly wrong with me, and I needed to change that. And the more I wanted my sleep pattern to be different, the more I suffered. I will say the most important part of this process for me was first, I needed to stop taking intoxicants and stay stopped. That's a fancy way of saying I needed to stop getting high and getting drunk. And I needed to stop, this was never an issue for me, but it did surface sort of later on. So when I first started to work in the therapeutic community, prescribed medications were generally not an issue for me because I didn't really do them, not for very long. There was some experimentation with the psychiatrists I was in therapy with, but they weren't effective. And in fact, I remember at one point going into the psychiatrist that I was in therapy with a list of drugs that I knew worked. Worked in the sense of bringing me to numbness or bringing me to oblivion. And I presented him the list. He looked at the list and he said, "Oh, no, man, I can't give you those drugs." I said, "Then let's stop talking about this topic. It's off the table." In the 28th of May, 1980, let me go back. The 13th of April, 1983, I had what I hope is my last overdose. Now, an overdose is just a sort of indirect way of saying suicide attempt. I didn't necessarily want to die. I just didn't want to continue to live like I was living. I remember that night, 13th of April, 1983, I took 1,000 milligrams of barbiturate. It was a lethal dose. I survived that, and by chance. But I remember before I took that dose of barbiturates, I remember the image that I had in my mind was a picture of like one of these World War I wastelands in between trenches. It was just mud and barbed wire, and there was one tree there with nothing. It all burnt, and that's how my life felt. I just didn't see the point in it. I remember coming in and out of consciousness in the emergency room. I was living in Massachusetts, Concord, Massachusetts. And I remember coming in and out of consciousness, and I remember a nurse asking me, or some medical personnel asking me if I was going to do it again just before they put the tube down my throat to get me to throw up. And I said, yeah, you bet. And then I was out of consciousness again, and then I came back into consciousness in the intensive care unit, and I was there for like a day or so, and then they moved me to sort of like an adjunct room. I was still on that same ward, and 3 men came to visit me. I had no idea who these men were. I was asked if I would accept visitors, and I said, yeah. I was crazy. I was withdrawing, and I was doing crazy. I just wanted a cigarette, man. And I was like, I had these heart monitors on, and I was tapping on the heart monitors and watching the screen bounce around. I was just crazed. And these 3 guys came in, and one of the guys asked me this. The first thing he asked me the same thing: "Are you going to do it again?" And I said, "Absolutely. Anything's got to be better than this." And I remember he looked at me and he said, "How do you know? It could be worse." And at that point, I went, I had enough clarity to go, holy cow, man. Well, I mean, I've cleaned up my language, so I didn't really say holy cow, but it was holy cow, worse than this? Man, I better do something about this. Well, I didn't do something about it right away, because I remember I had to be discharged from the hospital in the care of the psychiatrist. He drove me back to my flat, not my flat, he drove me back to this small cottage I was living in. And 321 Main Street. And he dropped me off, and we set up an appointment. He left, and I went straight downtown to the package store and bought a 6-pack of beer. The only way I knew how to deal with the discomfort that I was living with was to anesthetize it. And I wasn't even really a beer drinker, but that's what was accessible to me at the time. On the 28th of May, 1983, I went unwillingly. I went to a drug and alcohol rehabilitation center in Spofford Lake, New Hampshire, and I went there predominantly not to stop using drugs and alcohol, but to just get away from all of you people, which were my problem. Because all of you were not doing what you were supposed to do. If you would only do what I knew you were supposed to do, my life would be okay. And that's how crazed I was. About 2 weeks into that process, all of a sudden there was this overwhelming awareness that really what they were telling me was correct. If I wanted my life to be different, I had to do things differently. And that would start by not taking any intoxicants, no alcohol, no drugs, and that I had to stay stopped. And so when I went in there, I was ambivalent. When I had this awareness, all of a sudden I was afraid. I was afraid that I couldn't do it because I had never done it. And I didn't know how, I didn't have any idea of how I was ever going to work with sort of the disenfranchisement I felt. I followed their instructions. I did what they told me to do. And, my life began to unfold for me. I mean, the first 6 or 7 years of my not drinking alcohol or taking other drugs were very difficult for me. And right around the 7-year mark, I was making an effort to become responsible, or to measure up to my ideas of responsible, productive member of society. And it was all my ideas of stuff. I had so many ideas, and I'm trying to get my life to conform to these ideas. I was very isolated from the truth of my life. I was working for the Department of the Army. One of the places where I worked was the Watertown Arsenal. For some reason, I was visiting the lawyer there, and he was in some reserve Army unit, and he'd been in training, and he somehow injured himself, and he was going on and on about how he was struggling with the Veterans Administration, and how he was suffering from post-traumatic stress, and he's going on and on. I was listening, and I turned around, and I left his office, and I remember we're in this old Victorian building, and there was this long hallway, that led to the steps. And I remember walking out, and that hallway all of a sudden started to go narrower and narrower and narrower and longer and longer. And I remember the thought, I said, this guy's got post-traumatic stress. What's up with you? And at that point is when I began to really be in a position to become more conscious of how profoundly I had been impacted by my military service. Not just my combat service, but my military service. Because for me, the trauma starts when the military trauma starts when in training. Because in training, I am being trained and conditioned to dehumanize a whole race of people, to create enemies. And in order to dehumanize a whole group of people that I call the enemy, I am in fact losing contact with my own humanity. I'm becoming less and less able to feel anything. Actual combat experience only injects that initial training and the impacts of it with steroids. Not literally, but figuratively. When I did hear a snippet of the introduction, and that snippet of the introduction defined me as being affected by severe post-traumatic stress. I don't like to make those gradations. I was affected the way I was affected, and it manifested itself in the way it did. A lot of the suffering that I work with today is also a result of the war after the war. So how I was affected by post-traumatic stress, how I was morally wounded, how that shaped my perceptions of the world around me, and then those perceptions influenced my decisions and how I felt about things. I was very invested in the problems are external, the solutions are external. What's Zen practice? First, not taking illegal drugs or prescription meds and not drinking. Then add to that Zen practice. What those have encouraged me to do is take my attention away from the external and bring it back to the personal. I remember being asked once, and I do this routinely, what's the most important thing in my life? And I will ask this routinely when I am invited to speak publicly, or if I'm facilitating a retreat. I'll ask people, what's the most important thing in your life? And I often hear, well, family, and my wife or my husband, my kids. And what I say is that all those things, yes, are important, but the most important thing in our life, one breath, followed by one breath. And then I ask people, how often do we do that consciously? I mean, breathe in, knowing that we're breathing in, and breathe out, knowing that we're breathing out. It is the most powerful tool I have at my access. I will share with you quite honestly. First, I don't have television. I'm glad I don't have TV. I do read newspapers. And I'm really quite anxious about what's unfolding what's unfolding out in Eastern Europe. I'm really anxious about that. And I can tell when my anxiety starts to raise, I can see how that affects other aspects of my life. And so when I notice that my anxiety is raising, because I want to notice, I immediately have tools at my access, and they're free. Breath. I mean, we have to breathe anyway, right? We don't breathe, we're dead. So why not breathe consciously? So what I do in my engagement with first in my own life, and then I share this with other people, veterans, family members. I share with them the tools that have really supported me. Meditation is key to that. Now, meditation cannot be taught. So if anyone's teaching you meditation, smile at them, embrace them, and really know that what they're teaching you is a particular form. So what I do is I pass on to the people I engage with a particular form. And that form, if one will engage with it in a disciplined way, if one will engage with it in a very conscientious way, consistently, then meditation, the truth of meditation, will have a chance to show itself to us. So in the tradition which I'm ordained, form is important, so I introduce people to the form. You don't have to sit like I'm sitting. It doesn't matter if you sit on a chair or on the edge of your bed. It doesn't matter if you sit on a stool. If you sit on a meditation cushion, fine, or you sit on the floor, that's okay. But where you sit is not so important. What is important is the form. So what I pass on to people is to establish first a solid base of support. There'd be 3 points of contact. So if we're sitting on something elevated, those 3 points of contact will be our bottom and our feet. So we want to sit a bit forward on whatever we're sitting on, and our feet want to be flat on the floor. And if we're sitting like in a meditation cushion or down on the floor, then the 3 points of contact become our bottom and knees. Want the knees down to the floor. That's those 3 points of contact. They form that tripod, that solid base of support. Then all other aspects of posture apply. We want to be, it's about cultivating a relationship with the body in space. I want to understand that this body is not separate from the space which it occupies, and to be sensitive to this body. And in the military, I had to be insensitive to this body because I had to be able to function through injury and pain. I had to be able to continue to function. So I didn't have a good relationship with my body. I had to cultivate that. I had to want that, and I had to cultivate that. So when sitting, I encourage people to sit with the back straight, not rigid but straight, noticing the natural curvature of the spine. Then to bring the chin in slightly, notice that the ears are in line with the shoulder, nose are in line with the navel. Head neither leaning to the left nor to the right, neither forward nor backward. Now, in the lineage in which I'm trained, we sit with the eyes mostly closed. However, if you want to sit with your eyes closed, it's not a big deal. I have no objections to that. You just have to be cautious you don't fall asleep. I've had the privilege to facilitate meditation retreats for veterans and their family members, and there's been a large number of people there. And you can hear it that after the first period of sitting, that the second day, you hear people, you're like 10 minutes into the sitting, right? It's really quiet, and all of a sudden you hear somebody's gone to sleep, However, and then I teach the hands. In the tradition I'm ordained, we have a particular form. We're taught to take the back of the left hand, place it into the palm of the right, rest it on our thighs with our thumb tips nearly touching. Now, this is not obligatory for practicing sitting meditation. You just need to find a comfortable place for your hands. If you're wearing a hoodie, you just don't stuff them in the pouch. You don't put them in your pockets. You don't put your hands behind your back. What's most important is to be able to just sit still and concentrate on the breath. To breathe in through the nose, out through the mouth. And when breathing in, to not follow the breath into the body, but pay attention to the precise point where the breath enters the body. And when we breathe into the abdomen, not cut the breath off at the diaphragm. Most of us, when we breathe, we cut the breath off at the diaphragm, so the breath doesn't have a real opportunity to nourish us in the ways that it can. So when breathing into the abdomen, we'll know we're doing that because our stomach expands. And when breathing out, we don't follow the breath out of the body, but rather pay attention to the precise point where it leaves the body. And notice the stomach contract. And we sit just to sit. Nothing to be accomplished, nothing to be gained. To develop an active, conscious relation with the breath. Now, I also let people know that meditation and daily life are not two things. So people often separate them. You can bring this awareness that's established in the process of sitting meditation to everything that we do. So walking becomes a meditation practice. Eating becomes a meditation practice. Working becomes a meditation practice. Speaking becomes a meditation practice. Listening becomes a meditation practice. Like if I'm sitting here and I'm thinking about my response to what someone's saying or a question before they're finished talking, then I'm not listening. But at the root of all of this, I have to really want my life to be different without any idea what that's supposed to mean. I just need to create the circumstances where my life can begin to unfold for me. And in that process, I learn how to live at peace with my unpeacefulness. It's not quick. It's not easy. However, it is effective and it's free. So when this anxiety arises regarding the current circumstances in the world, I have at my access my breath. I'm fortunate in the fact that I'm living as an ordained monastic for quite some time, some 25 plus years, and so what I invite people to do is nothing that I don't do myself. So I encourage people that you have an opportunity here, like first thing in the morning before you do anything, when you get up. Make your bed like you never slept in it and sit for 5 minutes. 5 minutes. I tell you, when I first engaged with this practice, 5 minutes was an eternity. But I stayed with it. 5 minutes. And the last thing before you go to bed at night, repeat the process. Sit for 5 minutes. And connect with the breath. And in this process of connecting with the breath, I have an opportunity to discover how my mind distracts me, how my mind starts running down these various paths and rabbit holes. The moment I'm aware of where my mind is distracting me, I'm able to come back and into an active relation with my breath. I've learned that the thoughts that I have and the feelings that I have are influenced or shaped by the conditioning that has been passed to me through all of my family generations. And that conditioning that's been passed to me by all those family generations have shaped how I decide. They've actually been making my decisions for me. When I think I've been making my decisions, it's actually all that conditioning that's making those decisions. I don't promise people salvation. I don't promise them cures or fixes. What I do promise, and I will put this in writing with an official stamp. I mean, I have them. I got these official stamps. I got this monastic thing going on. With an official stamp, I will share with you unequivocally that if you're willing to just follow these simple instructions, sitting 5 minutes in the morning, 5 minutes in the evening, connecting with your breath, working with all of the ideas we have of what healing is supposed to look like or how I'm supposed to feel, and slowly let those drop away over time, sitting just to sit, walking just to walk, that we can learn how to live at peace with our unpeacefulness. Healing is not the absence of suffering. It's learning to live in a more conscious relation with that. As we do that, our suffering becomes an ally and not an enemy. that suffering has supported me in so many ways. My greatest, what I used to perceive as my greatest liability, has become a tremendous asset. Because I was willing to follow some simple instructions. I've really talked long enough to you. What I'd like to do is open this up for any questions that you have. But first I'm going to lay out a format for those questions. First I will say, if you disagree with anything I say, I don't want to argue about the rightness of your position or the wrongness of my position. If you disagree with anything I've said, I'll tell you in advance you're already correct. If you have a question, please ask that directly. 12 words or less. Just ask the question. You don't have to, please don't go through a long story of, you don't have to describe the circumstances before asking. Any response that I give you will be from my own experience and from the tradition in which I'm ordained. I don't have any answers. If you want answers, I have answers, but that costs you money. No, just joking. No. I'm a mendicant by vow. So everything I do for free. If people appreciate what it is that I do, and they want to support the work that I do through donations, they're welcome to do that, but it's not obligatory. I get to travel all over the world because in order for me to come to a place, people have to be willing to pay for my travel, provide me a simple place to stay, and feed me. That's all that I ask. Because I cannot keep what I have without sharing that freely with the people who benefit from it. And so that my commitment, I have an unwavering commitment to our tribe. I have an unwavering commitment to bring an end to war in my lifetime. And the roots of war, violence and suffering, are in me. The problem is not external, it's here. If I bring an end to the roots of war, violence, and suffering in me, then that begins to spread to the families, to the society, the custom, the communities, the cultures around me. It's not the easiest thing to do, but it is eminently more efficient and more. I benefit more from that than I ever have anything in my life. So if you have a question, just raise your hand. I'll do my best to recognize you. Just ask me directly, and I will respond to you based on my experience and my practice. So, questions? Yes, Lawrence.
How did you actually come to the practice of Buddhism?
Sure. You want to mute your. So I was in therapy for a period of time with an NMD psychiatrist. This man helped me save my life. At the same I was at a transition point in terms of that individual therapeutic process, and I started into a therapeutic process with a social worker. I was going to a group therapy with this person, and it was a group of people, it was a mixed group, men and women, because I wanted to learn how to socialize, because I was often referred to as being antisocial. In that group with that social worker recognized that sort of the traditional avenues of therapy and such, they weren't really supportive to me, because I had a high level of distrust for institutions and organizations, and that social worker mentioned to me that there was this Buddhist monk who had done some work with, veterans and had had some success. And that there were some, and it would be good if I could meet him, but he lived in France but he had some books published, and I said, oh, great, I'll read the books immediately. I never did. I lied to her because I thought, Buddhist monk, get out of here with that. Someone trying to sell me religion, And I had all kinds of obscenities running through my head. But about 3 weeks or a month later, somebody in that group came with a catalog from a holistic institute in upstate New York, and where this very same monk was going to facilitate a meditation retreat for veterans at this holistic institute. And so they presented this in that group, and the social worker was like over the moon. And I looked at this thing and I said, oh, that's wonderful. I'd really like to go, but I don't have any money. I can't afford that. And they turned the page and they'd highlight it with that yellow highlighter stuff, that we give scholarships. So in essence, I was bagged. And I called them up to reserve a place, and I made it. I just told them the truth of who I was in that particular time, and made it as difficult as possible for them to give me a space. But the organizers from this particular monk said, we don't ever turn anybody away. So I showed up there. I'm a Harley rider, and I showed up there. I had a black sleeveless shirt with a bandana, and I wore a mask at that time when I rode. I wore a mask and with a helmet. I didn't want to wear a helmet, but I got tired of paying fines, so I wore the helmet. And I had a rifle case on the side of my of my motorcycle. It used to have a rifle in it until I got stopped by the Massachusetts State Police, and they told me it wasn't a good idea. And so I took it out. Actually, the police officer took it out, gave me a piece of paper, and I had to go collect it. And when I got to this retreat, I remember they had a place for me to camp, and I said, no, I'm not staying there. And I found a place away from everybody, and I had my motorcycle by my tent. And I remember walking up to the hall where they're going to have the initial meeting, and I saw these guys, they were hugging each other and stuff, and I thought, Jesus, what did I get myself into here? This is crazy. But I went. And then when the monk came out to address us in the beginning, I realized there was just him and his assistant, and I realized he was Vietnamese. And I tell you, I thought I had sort of made peace with all of this, but man, I saw this guy, and like I went into almost a full-blown panic attack. But I stayed with the encouragement of people. I was calling people on the phone and stuff. Right, no cell phone. I had a telephone. Right, I'm calling people on the payphone, and they're encouraging me to stay, and I just stayed. I stayed. At the end of this retreat, I remember I approached this monk, and his assistant was there, and I wanted to apologize for all of the killing and destruction I had been responsible for in Vietnam. And I couldn't say it. I was crying, snot was running out of my nose, and all I could say was, I want to go back to Vietnam. I don't know why I said that. I don't know if it was even true. That's what came out of my mouth. And his assistant said, before you come back, before you go over there, because if you go over there now, you will be exploited. Your suffering will be exploited. He said, why don't you come to our monastery? Let us help you. We can help you. No one up to that point in this country had ever said that to me. And I agreed to go. I said, yeah, I'd like to go, but I don't have any money. They said, just say you'll go, and we'll see what happens. And so I said, okay, I'll come. About 2 hours after I agreed to come, I was again full of fear, because what my mind was telling me was the only reason they invited me was they were going to get me there. They were going to then throw me in a tiger cage They were going to put me on trial for war crimes, and then they were either going to kill me or they were going to put me in prison for the rest of my life. That's the stories my mind was telling me. That's the kind of grip that my moral injury had on me. That's the grip that my post-traumatic stress had on me. I talked with a social worker, and the social worker said, nah, it's probably not going to go down like that. But, it was real in my mind. It was so real. And then what started to happen, I started to get checks in the mail. Pretty soon I had enough money to buy a round-trip ticket to France and a little extra. And then I had to make a decision. Well, now, do I go to France or do I go to the Caribbean? I said, no, man, I can't. I've been abstinent of alcohol and drugs too long. I said, no, I can't do that. So I bought the ticket and I went with the intention to stay for 30 days. And I ended up staying for 3 years. And that was where the process really started for me. And I can't really explain the process. I can share with you that when I lived in this place, it was a very small, intimate community. There weren't but 20 people there. And I can remember I had the opportunity to meet North Vietnamese soldiers there. I had the opportunity to meet, I remember one night I was sitting in the kitchen and these three Vietnamese guys walked in. They were like my age at the time, and I remember when they walked in, I just had that, and the hairs on the back of my neck kind of went up. And I got into a talk with them, and they had been Viet Cong fighters. But we had a chance I had a chance to experience I got to experience a lot of feelings and memories and thoughts that I didn't even know that I had. And I got to experience more deeply the nature of my suffering. And I had a tool to deal with that. And I had a frame, a safe place in which to deal with that. And so I just kept it up. I didn't stay, I left after 3 years and circumstances led me to this tradition. But yeah, so that's essentially how it began for me. Question? Yes, Robert, Anthony.
Sorry, never used this. I was just wondering if you do yoga, if there's any particular type of yoga that you are partial to?
First, I want to ask this. So you're Robert Anthony. Are you any relation to Mark Anthony? No, sorry, I couldn't help myself.
Right.
If you'd mute your microphone, please. Let's see, if you can't, maybe I can. All right, you got it. Personally, I'm not a yoga guy. And I will share that most of the yoga that I see being offered out today is it's like spandex exercise, posturing stuff. We have someone here who is are you a master yet, Kasia?
I have over 1,000 hours of certified training in a single tradition.
Yes. So we have Kasia, and Kasia's I've known Kasia for a couple of minutes now. Also, I have connection. I just don't want to give up how long. I also have connection with another woman over in Pensacola, Florida. I'm in Mary Esther, Florida, in the Panhandle. She's over in Pensacola, Florida. And I very much respect, she has some family members who were in the military, and I very much respect her approach to the practice of yoga. So I don't do it. I don't encourage it. However, I have offered it at different retreats, but I've only ever used this one person over in Pensacola. And now I have an opportunity. I have access to 2 people. So I have access to her and I have access to Kasia. So I'm just very cautious. I've had people come to these retreats who want to offer that, and I'm very protective of of the people who come to these retreats because I'm responsible for them. And I see a lot of yoga instructors that they come, they have this idea of they want to fix us or mother us or caretake us in some way, and that just creates more suffering. And so I'm cautious about it. I'm not averse to it if people get support from that, but I want to make sure that what they get is authentic, or as authentic as possible. Question? Yeah, JW.
Good to see you, Claude. Good to hear your voice.
Thank you.
I've learned a lot from you. Like you were talking about all these years of suffering and everything. The most beneficial thing for me has been the breath work. Has been the meditation. That I learned from you. And when you speak of the 5 minutes in the morning and the 5 minutes in the evening. So the first part of the question is that simply all that you do is those 5 minutes? And I'm not talking about the formal stuff otherwise, but every morning and every evening, is that what you do is the 5 minutes? And then, I'm at a place in my recovery today where there is no obsession. I'm in a very strong, solid place, but I'm also have a very acute awareness of what will happen if I don't maintain, the work that I'm doing. And I'll be honest, I'm not completely disciplined to the point where I am rigid in my 5 minute AM and PM.
Yeah.
So
well, I will say, JW, I'll say that there's a difference between being disciplined and being rigid. There's a difference between being committed and being rigid. In the beginning, I might have had to be a bit rigid. Now, for the most part, yes. I sit 5 minutes in the morning, 5 minutes in the evening. Because for me, it's what I learned a long time ago was that it doesn't matter how long I sit. It's the intention that I bring to sitting and the attention that I pay when I'm sitting. And so to really not be dependent on time or space, but really to bring my attention, full attention right there into that moment. And in the effort to do that, I get to see what distracts me. There are some times when circumstances arise that I might only have the chance for 10 breaths. There are circumstances that arise where I'm able to sit longer. I mean, in my Zen training, we started sitting at 4:30 in the morning. We sat till 9 o'clock at night. And we had breaks in between, but we're talking like 12 hours. It's really the disciplined, committed, the disciplined commitment to do that, just to do it without question, first thing in the morning, last thing at night. That's really what has supported me the most. Question. Oh, Scott.
Hi there. Thank you for showing up tonight. My question to you is, how do you find it helpful to teach breathwork and beginning meditation to individuals who put on high alert by breathwork, such as snipers who go through the same process before shooting?
Scott, what I'll say, there you go. Thank you. The training that snipers receive, it's a misappropriation of the value of breath awareness. We can take something that's positive and misconstrue it. For example, the term mindfulness has become quite common in the lexicon, and you now have a whole plethora of mindfulness teachers. The reality is that mindfulness cannot be taught. Mindfulness is a byproduct of a disciplined spiritual practice rooted in breath awareness. Like meditation cannot be taught, yet there's scores of meditation teachers. Now, what I can't answer your question exactly. If that question if Scott, that question applies to you personally, I would be glad to interact with you privately and to be able to go into this topic in more depth. I will also say that for example, I was a martial artist. I should say I am a martial artist. I don't study kicks and punches anymore, but I started at the age of 14. And I studied and taught for 27 years. And there we were taught a form of meditation, but it wasn't the kind of meditation that I was introduced to through my studies and practices in the monasteries. It was more about mind control rather than becoming conscious and aware of what distracts me from being conscious and aware. So I had to relearn a lot of techniques. I had to relearn a lot of things. Or I had to be willing to be open to explore these different techniques from different angles of perception. So if this is something that applies to you specifically, I'm glad to engage with you and talk with you privately. I'm not difficult to find. I will say, though, that if an individual is having difficulties with sitting meditation, then I have other forms of meditation practice that I can introduce them to. And if they're willing to work with me, we can work through a process to help to establish a different relationship with the techniques that we have been taught that have been exploited. There are other people out there too. I mean, I'm not the only person. I mean, you have Camilo and the work that he does. You have Ed and the work that he does. What I say is that if one engages in this practice will support us in whatever avenue we choose to apply ourselves to. This is not in and of itself the only way. But Scott, I really appreciate your question. Like I said, if this applies to you, and I'm glad to talk to you, because in fact, I have a person who does work with me, who was a sniper. I also have had a couple of men who came to retreats, that was their military training specialty, and so I know I have some experience in that realm. Last question. Jim Proctor. I wonder if you're any relation to Raymond Proctor.
No, I'm not.
See, I grew up with some Proctor families. So.
Do you really?
Yeah.
So yeah, Claude. Real quick question. I came home from Vietnam in '71, and I retired from work in 2016, but I took on another job in 2018. Have you heard stories about post-traumatic stress disorder getting worse? It feels like I'm in Chicago, and it feels like I am 100% on guard, alert, every day, every hour, and it seems like that's permeated me since COVID and retirement.
Well, hang on just a sec.
I mean,
here's my response to that. You have always been on alert and didn't notice it. Now, all of you have probably heard the number. Between 17 and 22 veterans a day commit suicide. I don't know what that number is today. I know that number is derived out of the number of states that report those statistics, and I know only 20 states out of 50 report those statistics. I also know that the largest percentage of those veterans who take their lives are between 50 and 70. I mean, moral injury is a reality for us. It's a wounding. It's a betrayal of what is right by institutions and people in positions of power and authority. It's a violation of everything we were taught to be true and correct. Under the umbrella of moral injury comes post-traumatic stress. I don't call it a disorder because we're not disordered and we're not damaged. Our response to the world around us makes sense based on the truth of our lives and our experience. How to learn to live at peace with that reality. And not to change it, not to alter it, but to learn to live at peace with that unpeacefulness. I know a lot of people who've done a number of different techniques, and they do get relief from those techniques, and then at a certain point in their life, they retire. There's a health crisis in the family or personally. A child or a relative will get into trouble, or someone dies. And suddenly, that resolution that they thought that they had evaporates. And then they're confused. I would say your post-traumatic stress is not getting worse. You're just in a position where you have less escape, so you have less anesthetics. And there are, and please, I'm always on alert, man. And I'm okay with that. You know, I know things about the world that the ordinary person just doesn't know. You know, I still walk into the supermarket, and there are times when I go, you know, I get like I get anxious about taking a can of mushroom soup off the counter because that thing could be booby trapped. I mean, the chances are not likely that that's going to be the case, but it's not beyond the realm of possibility. And I think in the times that we're living in right now, I don't want to say that there are any. Look, so I got out of military hospital in '68. May 4th, 1970, I was at Kent State University, and I was there when the National Guard locked when they locked bayonets and spread out in a line and started to approach us with their gas masks on. They gassed us, but the wind. It was really kind of funny in the beginning. They gassed us with tear gas, but the wind was blowing, and it just blew the gas away from us. So it was really ineffective. I thought this was pretty typical. But at a certain point, they were herding us up this hill into these buildings, and at a certain point, they just opened fire. You know, they killed 4 people. They wounded 13 or 15 others. You know, violence is not a solution. It only gets more violence. And these days you just never know. I mean, it's always true. You just never know when it's going to show itself. And violence has so many different forms. I'm not uncomfortable with being on alert. I'm okay with it. See, that's what I mean. Peace with my unpeacefulness. Living in Chicago. Yes. All those Bears fans and all that cold wind coming off the lake, I'd be on alert too, man. Anyway, look, it's time for me to bring this to a transition point. I really want to do this in a way that's usual for me. Well, sort of usual. Like COVID and Zoom and all of that have changed some things. Usually when I'm doing a presentation like this, it's like impossible for me to sit down. And I just have a hard time sitting and talking. But here with the computer, and I'm on a cushion, and so I've had to learn how to do that. But what I first want to say is I want to thank Chuck for inviting me to meet all of you. I also want to thank Charlie Pacello. Does that work okay, Charlie? Pacello? Or do you want to say...
It's Pacello.
Pacello.
It's a time.
Yeah, Pacello. Yes. I want to thank the two of you for the work that you do in bringing people together, and for inviting me. And Chuck is a regular attendant at the veterans group that we have every Sunday. If you're interested in that group, you're welcome to attend. It's also on Zoom, and it's 6 p.m. Central Time. need a Zoom address, Kenshin can provide that to you in the chat box. Also, if you're more interested in me and the work that I do, there's information available on the Zaltho Foundation website, and Kenshin will give you that information as well. To have the opportunity to be in front of you and to address you is a privilege for me. Your questions are teachings for me. They really invite me to explore the truth of what it is that I have the opportunity to engage myself with. I can't thank you enough for being present. I can't thank you enough for your desire to want to live differently. I guess you do, or you wouldn't be here, because there's other stuff to do. And for your service, I bow to you.
Thank you for listening to this episode on ZalthoLIVE. If you would like additional information, please look at the show notes or visit zaltho.org. That's ZALTHO.org. Our work is made possible solely through donations, so please consider making a tax-deductible gift on our website. We wish you well and thank you.